Hello and welcome to another episode of Speculative Speculations. I'm Varsha.
I'm Dan.
Carl.
I'm Jared.
And I'm Chris.
This is a series where we talk about speculative stories in all their forms. We are currently working our way through Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. And we are talking about the two sections after the middle section, which was Slucia's Crossing and everything after. We're talking about Sonmi, the repeat of Sonmi 451, and the repeat of Timothy Cavendish, their stories. The short story for today is The Squid Chooses Its Own Ink by I know this, Jose Casares. I forget the middle name.
Adolfo Casares, but you're good.
Adolfo, there's no Jose. Of course not. I got the last one. No, this goes unedited. You see all my mistakes.
Show must go on.
And the short story for next week, we're working our way through the big book of science fiction. Oh no, wrong book. I opened the wrong book. Do you have
To
it?
Be or Not to Be by Kurt Vonnegut Jr.
Oh,
cool.
that's what that is. Oh my god. When I was reading this title yesterday, I was like, 2BR0 2B.
I feel like I've let everybody down by jumping in and telling you, rescuing you there. I feel like I apologize to every listener of this podcast right now.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what we would have had?
Shame on your corrective tendencies.
No, Mike. All the efforts to not be last in the introduction are really it's a bit much now.
So yeah, you missed me doing that crap reading of that title. But Kurt Vonnegut, and yeah, so this is us working our way through the big book of science fiction, and that's the short story for next week. So with that, let's get into the repeat of Origin for Sonmi 451. Thoughts, high level. We got two more, and Chris is making a face. Go ahead, Chris.
I'll just say yawn. I did not like, and I loved the first part of the story, but I just thought this was all exposition to very little reward for me. I thought the kind of ending or where it ended up was sort of what you thought was going to happen from the very start. I don't know. I just found it very convoluted and didn't have the drive or pacing of the first telling of the story where he was sort of journeying through life. In this case, it was very much more of the interview and kind of we went here and then we went here and I saw this and then rather than any kind of personal stakes in it or otherwise. I thought it was kind of interesting the way it ended. I thought the resolution of it at the end was sort of okay, that's clever, but I struggled through most of that story, I have to say.
This is wild to me because I enjoyed this way more than I enjoyed the first half.
It's crazy, isn't it?
I was really emotionally connected to it. I was devastated when what's his name betrayed Sonmi, and I love the ending. I was like blown away. Like this is it. This is I had faith the ending of this book will be good because these two like section endings we've gotten, I was so satisfied by. And I love, I mean, we saw the Messiah thing coming because like it was established right in the previous section, but the way it played out, I still felt like had some interesting twists and turns, including down to the fact that the whole conspiracy was orchestrated by the society, and what do they call it? It's not the is it the Juche? The
Unanimity?
Juche, yeah, and that like it's so cyberpunk, so noir to have the bad guys like win, be behind everything, that it's this grand conspiracy and there's no outrunning them. And then there's the silver lining, there's the hope that we know pays off of Sonmi effectively being like, listen, they are creating their own destruction. They don't realize, that my word will get out, that they are, it is spreading like a virus. And that is going to lead to the destruction of corpocracy. And then I loved getting to see so much of the world peeled back. I loved the insights into the like different thematic explorations of kind of love and identity and the soul. We got a little deeper into how the souls work, the capital S souls, and the real souls underneath it all. And I was just moved by the love story and devastated that it was not what I thought it was. And it adds this layer of dramatic irony now to the fact that if these are two souls reincarnating, they end up together. And also the character who is the traitor, I forget whatever his name is, his Korean name, but that he ends up as Zachary, who is tempted to kill the reincarnation of Sonmi multiple times. It added so many layers to everything we'd read before this, and I just was swept off my feet by it.
I have a question about the reincarnation thing, but where is it? Why is that a thing? Is it specifically mentioned anywhere?
What do you mean? Why is it a thing? Mechanically? Because I think it's just the universe. People just reincarnate.
No, but is it mentioned anywhere that that's what's happening?
Other than the tattoo or the birthmark that seems to carry through, and even it is some near Cavendish, maybe it's Cavendish that basically says, this birthmark, he doesn't really have the same birthmark.
I see.
He talks about it later on, but it's literally a line that he alludes to kind of later. It's very subtly done, I think, as it goes through, and it's kind of postulated that it was maybe two people up to this point the other week rather than just the one person, which seems to make sense. This eternal love story.
The reincarnation first really comes up with not only the birthmark, but Louisa Ray, when she's reading the letters that Frobisher wrote to Sixsmith. She has memories. It's like she's not just reading them; she actively remembers being in the manner of the rich dude who he's stealing from. Frobisher stealing from, or not stealing from, but tricking, manipulating, and that's the moment where I think that can of worms was really opened, and then we've now had the birthmark reoccur several times. And while Timothy Cavendish says no one's ever described his birthmark as a comet, the fact that he's talking about, he has this unique birthmark, come on. And, I think there have now been increasing allusions to, to me, it's all really laid out with the discussion of Buddhism and Siddhartha in this section of Sonmi's story with the elder woman who talks about reincarnation and how eventually people will be reincarnated over and over again, effectively until their souls are at peace, until they've done whatever they needed to do. And my theory that was a previous theory, but now I feel increasingly confident about, is it's about these two people who are intrinsically connected, and they cannot, they continue to be reincarnated until they can find each other and fall in love and actually live out their lives together, which we see happen in Sluicious Crossing and everything after.
Yeah.
That is my theory. We'll see if that is ultimately how it pays off, but I think so. And the question at this point for me now is, where does this fit into our very first story? Who are the two reincarnated people? One of them we know is our narrator, Adam, but other than that, I don't know.
I wonder if it plays out a little better in the movies, the idea of the reincarnation, because it's so offhand in this book and so casually mentioned, and other than the birthmarks, but you don't know what the birthmarks represent. You don't know that they represent reincarnation. They just might represent, some other connection of some sort. But and the reincarnation is mentioned in the books in a few places here and there, and it's hinted at. I wonder if the movies pointed out a little.
I mean,
You
the
know.
movies, they do have the same actors take over different roles, which does
Yeah, I wonder
point
if that
towards it,
gives it a
right?
little more weight, and if I'm remembering that, and that's why it sticks so well for me, at least, while I'm reading this. But it is something that's like when you're involved in the story itself, you're not quite kind of thinking about the reincarnation aspect of it, because
Right.
other than looking for those little tiny connections to the other stories, because you're just you're reading about the story that's happening to that person in the moment, and so it's kind of it's interesting how you can pick up on different things like that.
I mean, to be honest, I had completely forgotten about it until Carl mentioned it, and I was like, yeah, actually, yeah, I remember this is supposed to be a thing, because I did not notice it.
Yeah.
And I was
It
enjoying
is
the book just for different reasons.
right. It's subtle. It's not like I think the tricky thing, and maybe what you're touching on, Jared, is I don't remember how it is in the movie, but I imagine the reincarnation is like a more forward part of the story. It maybe drives the story a little more. While here, it's kind of this undercurrent,
Yeah.
as opposed to like all the individual sections have their own plots going on, right? The
Yeah.
characters are doing different things. And while there's some kind of thematic connection, it's not as direct. And so
Yeah.
the only thing
Well,
that
I
really
think
connects
I
is the
think for a movie it
reincarnation.
would be for a movie it would be more visually stunning to have it
That
more
too. Yeah.
prominent. Yeah.
I do remember that from the movies. I remember thinking it was like really beautiful, but
Yeah.
beyond that, yeah. What?
And
Oh,
sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead, Varsha, please. Curious about your
Yeah,
thoughts.
I was going to say the reincarnation aspect of it. It is heavily hinted, or rather, at least hinted in the form of characters thinking or really believing that a reincarnation is a thing and that they are or their friends are reincarnated versions of someone who's come before, right? Like Louisa Ray has a lot of I guess she's the most overt example of the reincarnation. But with Slucius Crossing, for instance, I forget the name of the guy, but he goes through like this drug-induced what's the word I'm looking for? Like state of consciousness where he's like, oh, I was reliving all my previous lives, which sure, but also we've seen a lot of like real world people, for instance, who talk about reincarnation and that they are rebirthed forms of people who've come before. And it may or may not be true. I don't think we know enough yet. Like, at least I'm pretty agnostic about that, both in the real world. But in the book, I don't like, while it is hinted, I'm not sure if it is like I feel like the setup is very similar to the real world, where you can choose to believe it or you can choose not to. But at the end of the day, what it really is about, I think, regardless of whether or not they are reincarnated forms of each other, the like we can use this connecting thread to find connections between all the stories and similarities in the lives they've all led, or how what one person did influenced or affected people far in the future from them. That could be because they are the same person or not. It could just be that someone deeply affected someone, like, which is again like I feel like it's a fantastic way to say sort of like we could like sort of to sort of so how do I put this, to help us not other anyone anymore. They're all such widely different cultures, but they could be the same person looked across time. So for anyone who says you're different from me, I don't like you, or like here are all the reasons why I hate you, this could really be a good, I guess, metaphor for why you shouldn't, because you could be the same person, like no matter where you are, what time you are, who you are, you might find connections with people that you probably have nothing to do with.
On the
I
other
don't,
hand, though, in
yeah.
every story there are bad guys, which like in the last story, there was the, when he went into his house and there was the Kona sleeping there, he was like, oh, this guy could be me when I reincarnate, but he still killed him.
That's true.
Sort of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would say though that like the bad guys are often defined as people who lack that empathy and
Yeah.
definitively like those who, we've had the theme of like civilization and savage, and it's, the people who, regardless of how mainstream society might classify them, typically, whether they're a corpocrat or whatever, the bad guys are the savages, right? The ones who don't look at other people and don't overcome their kind of base instincts, their animal instincts to just fight for survival, and to conquer everyone, that sort of thing.
Like they lack empathy, right? And just like they lack empathy and connection with other people. So there's no thread connecting the bad guys. Well, there is a thread connecting the good guys.
I disagree with that because, well, one, I would say the thread is they lack empathy, but two, some of the bad guys are the reincarnated characters. So
yes,
that complicates it. I mean, going into what Varsha was saying, right? It goes back to the bit in Sluicious Crossing where it's like it's the metaphor of the whole story, right? Of the cloud atlas, and how clouds, are defined as being, or like rather souls are defined as being like clouds, and they may change shape, they may move and form different things, but they are fundamentally the same thing, no matter how they present themselves.
And the theory of reincarnation that I'm familiar with, like there's two ways I've heard it, and I don't know what the root of each theory is, but and I'm talking about like the real world reincarnation myths and theories. Is one is that like the soul as a whole reincarnates to another person, so you're like the same person across time, and the other is that you sort of like disperse into constituent pieces and like become parts of another person, so each person has parts of like people who came before or whatever, like kind of like the whole atoms and molecules thing, except with souls. And I don't know, like that could also be a possible interpretation for this story. And like there are parts of each person in many of the characters that we interact with, maybe.
One last thing, I just want to say too about this. Excuse me, crap in my throat. Is I'm certainly not going to argue with anyone about whether or not they didn't like a thing, but a thing I would argue against is the idea that the reincarnation is not real, is because the story is so much less rich and has so much less going on if it isn't real. Like I feel like fundamentally it's saying much more, and there's much more emotional depth if the reincarnation is actually happening. And I feel like you are robbing this story of something if you treat the reincarnation as being untrue in whatever way. Just because it's just like what I wouldn't say it's depthless without it, but like to me that's kind of the central connecting strand for all of these stories. Like going back to what Jared was saying, where it's like there is so little that connects all of these. And so I think without the reincarnation thing, you lose that connective tissue.
I mean, the way I was enjoying it, let's say, was that because each of the stories to me are kind of like fairly standard for their genre or niche, whatever, right? They're like typical examples of a story in that niche, right? But what I was enjoying the most was the language and the way it's written and how the language changes between all the different ones and noticing all the little subtleties and the words that he chose to use and how those words evolve. Like, for example, I think in the last story, like he always says like, oh, when you say to betray or to lie, say Judas, right? And Judas is also used in the previous Somni story. So it's like you see the evolution of the words for all these different centuries, right? And even with previous stories, you see like, like the words they're using in Victorian times compared to the words they're using before. Like there is some commonality, and then they slowly change the way it's being described and how they're talking and everything. I found that the most fascinating, personally, aspect of this book, because I was finding so many little things to notice, and appreciate.
Yeah, his
Great point
writing
about the Judah.
is exquisite. I mean, he definitely has fantastic word choice when he's making his points and coming across there. So it's interesting. That's an interesting take that you have, Kyle, on the reincarnation thing, because the stories are thematically strong, connected strongly thematically, as well, and I think they could be easily. I mean, I think the reincarnation is a thing. That's not what I don't. But I think that the stories in here, this book, could easily been jiggered a little bit differently to just have them thematically related and not have it specifically be reincarnation. And I think it could still work if it was meant to be that way. But so that I find that's very interesting how this book is hitting us.
Yeah, I think it links a couple of ways. I think you're all right, to be perfectly honest, because I think all of those things give it that layer and that kind of connection. Like, because each person's story is linked to the person's last by use of a legend or a story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
One story picks up a book, and especially in this kind of second one, he leans on Timothy Cam. This story's a lot more in the second part of the book. You know, the fact that he's just sort of watched the Disney as it was beforehand, and
That kills me.
yeah, it's especially funny when you come to read. I think the second half of Timothy Cameron's story, because you can basically see it on the screen. It's very classically, tropes of that type of film in some ways, like a love bug or something in some ways. But yeah, it has a number of things that kind of lead one character into the other one and kind of have this connection in much the same way as we kind of read stories and connect with other characters that are within it as well, and sort of kind of aspire and see the world through their eyes and stuff. So I'd be interested to see. My question in all this is, how does this tie back to the very first character? Like, I can sort of see a through line through Louisa. I can see a through line, through Frobisher to a certain extent, but back through
That's going to be
Ewing,
the kicker.
that's going to be the kicker for me, because I can sort of see the lines beforehand, and there's got to be something. There's got to be a good reason why you go back to Ewing and that thing, and I think that's the bit that ultimately will tie this book together. And give it its real kick and its real pull, because everything else sort of makes sense apart from that, because it's sort of, even in my head, is the most standalone-ish of all the stories in some ways, because it doesn't have the romance on the face of it. It doesn't have any of those elements in it, and yet there must be something. There's obviously something that we've missed in that story, I feel. So.
I hear you there. I am so intrigued by that, and I remain excited to see how it plays out, because I have enough faith in David Mitchell at this point that it will be satisfying, but it very easily could not work. And if it does fall flat, I think that would taint the rest of the book, right? So I am very intrigued to see how that ending works, connects with the larger picture. Because I don't see it other than the thematic through lines of civilized and savage. It just seems so disconnected otherwise.
I think I would still enjoy the book, even if the ending is trashed, personally.
Oh, that's good.
I'm not as invested in the actual narrative. You guys, somehow.
I think that's probably me too, because I'm failing to remember why I liked this book and gave it 5 stars the first time around. But I just have no idea. And so far, the book has done nothing to remind me in the sense
Really?
of like, I don't dislike it, but I'm like, what I remember is like this feeling of, oh, this was so brilliant when I finished the book. That's all I remember. And the structure is brilliant, the language, everything, like all the technical aspects are there. And I guess the through line of reincarnation and or the fact that each story follows from the previous one. I'm guessing that's probably what I was awed at. And I think even at this point, like, that's sufficient to do the 5 stars. But I feel like I'm missing a bit of an emotional connection to each of the characters. And the feeling that I remember is from having an emotional connection to all of them. But maybe it was just to the book, to how it is written, and how and what you can do with structure and the through lines of reincarnation, or just playing with the idea of reincarnation in this way. I think without being explicit about it, without like they none of them are the same people. Like you would not dare to guess that they are the same soul transmitting across time. They're so different, which, and I think we talked about this a little bit when we were discussing Lord of Light. It's people change over time. Like this could be a metaphor for so many things, like reincarnation in and of itself, like exploring that as an idea. But and the other thing I talked about, like let's say reincarnation is not a thing, they could still find ways to be connected to people, and like find ways to like each other more than not liking each other, or to say I am a much different person now than I was 10 years ago. All of these things, these kinds of stories are metaphors for. And but like that's just me adding depth right now, or thinking about the depth right now. I'm pretty sure I didn't think about these things when I read this 10 years ago. So I don't know why I liked it as much as I did, but I am really enjoying it my second way around. Sorry, Jared, you were going to say something when I started, but okay.
It is. No.
Views to put into this. It just speaks to the work itself that we can get all this out of it, and we can all be right, and we can all still enjoy it in all these different ways. And I think that in and of itself is a success marker for the book.
I think it's really interesting what Varsha said, because I read an interview by, well, what's his name? Mitchell, right? Yeah. About him talking about this other book that he read that sort of inspired him about to the structure. And he said the same thing as Varsha said. He's like, oh, I remember reading it the first time. It was amazing. The structure, it was so experimental. I'd never thought about it. And then I read it again now or some year after and was like, it's fine, but it doesn't, and then there was like other comments from him saying, that's the nature of experimental works. They hit hardest the first time, and then they become sort of like, okay, well, after that there's nothing if you reread it. But he still says when he first read it, he thought it was one of the best books ever. Now he wouldn't say that, but he still says it is because of that first impression and that first formative read at the time. Right. So it's kind of like the same thing as Varsha said, which is very interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the 6 in, 6 out, like the accordion structure of the book,
Yeah.
that was fascinating. I'm pretty sure I I loved that about it. That was maybe my favorite thing about it. And I don't remember if I was expecting to re-hit the stories again when we finished with the Sonmi. I thought maybe it was just like going to be some sort of short story thing. I don't really remember if I expected it to all come back. But anyway, yeah, the structure was the most fascinating thing. Sorry, Carl, go ahead.
No, I mean, I in large part was just gonna echo what Dan was saying. That's that David Mitchell sort of pre-quoted you, Varsha. That I do think there's something, you were making me think of this movie I saw when I was in film school, The Grand Master, and it's this beautiful martial arts film made in China, starring, I think it's Donnie Yen. But I first watched it and I was like blown away. I was like, this is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. And I revisited it years later, and I was not nearly as entranced by it as I was the first time. I still appreciated it, but it just did not have the same effect on me. And I think a big part of it was that the some of the swings it took, the big like structural experimental swings it took, the cinematography. It's a beautifully shot movie. Really impacted me. And then once that initial layer of awe wore off, I was not as emotionally invested. And I could see that being a similar case here, because I would say I don't know that I'm overly emotionally involved with the characters. I think, part of the reason I'm defensive of the reincarnation is because I feel like a majority of the things I felt strongest about, like had the most emotional reactions to in this book, came about when I was thinking, oh my God, that's like the dramatic irony of this happening in this lifetime, and like, what that means for all these other lifetimes, and, the way that the relationships change across the ages. And, that to me, without that, it's like there's much less of an emotional hook. And, this core relationship that, I guess, depending on how it sees, like how it plays out, I think it's even debatable if you can even call it a romance, because they're like enemies sometimes, and like the guy betrays Sonmi, right? Like that's what a horrible thing. And but that core relationship I do find very interesting, and I am very intrigued too, particularly about like how it changes across the ages, and how it I am very I'm blown away by what you were saying, Varsha, about how in some ways this can be viewed as like talking about how people change over a lifetime. I think that there is something really interesting there that you could dig into and probably write a whole thesis about. um, and that's something too that I just really want to kind of sit with and think about, because I think you're onto something there.
So the line that I keep thinking of, it's from Lord of Light, which also explores reincarnation in some form. It's two people having a conversation, and the woman says, "You loved me then, didn't you?" And like, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, "Who I was then loved who you were then." And he is talking about a former life of his, but that could very well hold for us as people. So yeah, that line's stuck with me.
So true.
One of the neat things I found in the Somni story, when she goes to the rebels, and or the place with they don't have any electronics and stuff, and it's very monk like, and she asked the abbess there, if Siddhartha was a god, and the abbess answers, many thought him so, but they had these little hints about godhood and people becoming gods, or what they considered gods, and of course that relates to Somni basically being a god in the previous story, and I just like how that kind of tied into that aspect of it, because they mentioned a few other things about godhood and stuff during the interview, so that was very interesting to me. And I love the line the abbess says about if consumers found fulfillment at any meaningful level, corpocracy would be finished. Because that was basically Mitchell's little strike against commercialism there, but so I found that interesting as well. But there's a lot of neat little interesting stuff like that during the Somni story. Like Chris, I found it a little slow for my own taste at times. With all that said, I was just like, okay, let's move the interview along, and and I was but I did like how it ended, especially since it ended with her watching a Disney, but so
Very, very quickly, I just want to say what a great transition to the Timothy Cavendish story.
absolutely,
Like,
yeah.
Very much so.
David, talking about just the crafts of the writing, like what transitions are one of those things that are so often under discussed, underappreciated, and David Mitchell has had multiple just wonderful transitions
Yeah,
in this
but
book, and that's
yeah.
another one of them.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's the
but
same transition as the previous story to the Somni one, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah,
Looking
yeah.
at the egg.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Orson. Yeah.
It was,
All three stories are continuing or starting to watch the story that we just came from.
yeah,
Like,
Yep.
it's look and showing the Sonmi origin, And then Sonmi is like, I'm going to watch this movie. And I think, if I remember correctly, Cavendish got the second half of the Louis Array story and is about to read it. And we leave
Yes,
him.
yeah, that's exactly right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan.
My favorite little postulation in the Somni story was actually when they went and discovered that the fabricants are basically being produced to do all the labor and all of that kind of stuff. And it explores that idea of God, because at a certain point, if we have everybody to do our labor, it doesn't take too long before nobody knows how to put up a shelf. Nobody knows how to build a road. Nobody needs to do it. So if everybody is a god in that society, or humanity are all gods in that society with subjugates kind of below them, how does that leave humanity, or how does that leave the world at that stage? And I thought that was a really interesting, again, very short section within that kind of paragraph, but a very sort of interesting thought experiment in that regard, especially as we sort of push towards like automation being the king of everything that's drive that's going on at the moment. If at a certain point we end up losing a skill set and a group of people to enable us to do the work.
It's very striking, I think, a couple things. That one, the book seems to take a pretty strong stance that the sort of pre-industrial, more what we might consider more barbaric societies is kind of the more natural, more benevolent, decent way to live for humans, but also that it is kind of Gnostic, in like you were saying, Chris, in that it's like kind of attacking the idea of godhood, and that Siddhartha is like, no, he wasn't a god, but he was like the best of men, and that what's really put on the pedestal is the idea of the best instincts of men, and not divinity, and not violence, which kind of divinity in some way I think implies, because of the amount of control inherent in it, and the ways in which the world itself is violent, and so a god of the world is then necessarily going to be violent as well, and it's that benevolence in our best nature, the best parts of ourselves, that David Mitchell is really lionizing. And it's really interesting. I hadn't even thought about the divinity aspect of it. So thank you, Jared and Chris, for talking about that.
I really loved the scene in which they encounter this broken up statue of Buddha, and I love how it is described. Like, we don't find out until later that it was Siddhartha, but I think it's very clear in how it was described. Like, oh, this man talked about the cycles of life and rebirth and whatnot. And then I had to go and look up the statues in Korea, and there are several giant statues. Apparently, I don't know which particular one, but there was one that was next to a hill. Maybe that's the one that they mean.
That's
But
cool.
yeah, it was also interesting to me because I'm only used to seeing Buddha statues with Indian features. Those statues had East Asian features. I was like, that
Yeah.
totally makes sense. But yeah, I went around doing some digging there for that. But that's really cool. I love that reference to Siddhartha, and I guess some of the discussion about rebirth that started in Slushas Crossing, but continued a little bit here. I'm trying to think. I think this one, the Sonmi one, might be the most thematically dense. Maybe its placement in the series of stories helps it along, or perhaps the time that it is set in and what it is using to tell the story about, maybe. But yeah.
I just thought of something, the reincarnation thing. Like in the Somni story, the fact that they kill what are they called?
Fabricants?
Fabricants.
The replicant, yeah. And then they feed them back to them. That's like also like sort of
Yeah.
reincarnation,
Yeah, that's true.
but in
Yeah.
a bad way.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But is it like they actually do that, right? Like that's not a fake part of a story, right?
No, I think that's real.
That's right.
And isn't there in the Cavendish story, in the first part, isn't he at the beginning shouting something like "Soylent Green is people" when he runs out of the, he tries to escape. So I was
Okay.
thinking
Yeah.
like
That
it's
is right.
also
Yeah,
reference,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's
So I'm
funny.
sure there's a
Oh
lot of these
man,
references
yes.
connecting different stories that I missed,
Oh
That
yeah.
right?
is-
But
Wouldn't
Yeah.
surprise me at all. Yeah.
The Cavendish
Sorry.
stuff is very meta too. I mean, he's making references to literature all the
yeah,
time.
Well, it's sad. Yeah. With J.D. Salinger reference in there as well, isn't there? So yeah.
Yeah.
Soylent,
I forgot about the
Soylent
screen
Green.
line. That's right.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
That's hilarious. That was a hint all along to the next step.
Yeah. Oh,
Are we ready to move on to the Cavendish one, or I mean, I don't know that there's too much to add.
it's pretty
well,
short.
I,
Yeah.
I I should leave then because I haven't read.
That section
Dan,
reads
man.
super quick if that helps,
Yeah.
Dan. You love
It
study
does, yeah.
fly through.
It's fine. I can just say what I thought about it next week.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
'Cause
Okay.
we'll get the
Bye,
run in.
guys.
See you then.
Take care.
Thanks. So, Timothy Cavendish orchestrates an escape. He makes friends, he loses friends, begs for the friendship back, and escapes from the. Okay, is this center really weird? Like, if all people are like sort of, it's a home for the elderly, but why aren't they allowed communication with the outside world? Why are their communications tracked? And
Because
is it
Nurse
so
Snopes is
horrible that
Nurse Ratched. Like, it's one flew over the cuckoo's nest in a lot of ways. Like, I was reading the whole thing going, okay, this is what this is.
it it feels almost shoehorned, like a prison break thing? Where like, why is this a prison?
So,
I don't
this
know.
this is the question I have about it, right? Are we reading the events or are we reading the dramatization of the events? Because I feel like the Disneyfication or the film making part of the story turns that into the prison / sort of thing as well. So that
Interesting.
again, that kind of very meta thing that seemed to happen in this, and that he's telling the story and he's talking about publishing the rights and selling the rights to the story at the end. I think we're getting like a dramatized version of this in some ways that kind of heightens it a little bit, which makes it
Okay.
even more fun, I think,
That's
because
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the way it makes the most sense if you look at it that way. Because you're right. Why would old people be imprisoned when they didn't do a crime? They're just old people who need a little help, and so it's that I think what you said makes more sense. That it's the movie, it's the dramatization. I mean, this felt like a
definitely.
you know who's that actor? You know, the Odd Couple type actor there. It felt like
Walter
these
Matthau, Jack
these
Lemmon,
old
yeah.
guys in a movie, doing hijinks, trying to escape from their situation and stuff like that, and so like a Jack Lemmon thing, and it just it just it was amusing. It was and it was it was I think you're dead on with that dramatization thing. Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning too. We haven't talked about it as much, and personally, I haven't thought about it as much. But all of these stories are stories. They are not the direct events that happened, right? They are being narrated. All the characters, all the viewpoints are inherently unreliable because of that, and they're all, whether they're letters or an interview about Sanmi's events, and she even talks about, like, yeah, some of the things are just like not true, and it's about the story I'm telling, right? And that I think you're spot on, right, with Timothy Cavendish, that he is dramatizing. I mean, that seems so inherent to his personality. The way
Yes,
he
it does,
talks
yeah.
and views the world, right? Is he would instinctively dramatize his life. And then, of course, he's publishing this as a book to then get it turned into a movie. Of course he's going to dramatize it, right? I mean, he's talking about how he would edit the Louisa Ray mystery,
That's
right? Take out the little
Got a bit there,
reincarnation
yeah,
bit because
yeah.
it doesn't have a fit, right? Like he absolutely is changing things up, tightening things, making things more dramatic, more extreme than they would be otherwise. And I think we have a lot. I think one of the ways we actually did talk about it was in our very first discussion with Robert Frobisher, with how we were like questioning, well, he views the daughter as like very sort of corrupt and wicked, and insert negative adjectives here. And I think we instinctively kind of went, well, I don't know, we're seeing this from his point of view, and he's clearly a very biased narrator, and I think that continues through all of them, right? Because they all are narratives. And I am now very curious who the hell the guy is who wrote the Louisa Ray mystery. I don't know about you all, but I'm like, where did he come into the story? Because it's not
Yeah.
Louisa Ray writing her story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's potentially dead.
Right.
There's
Absolutely.
there's a couple of other key giveaways in that. There's also the appearance of Mr. Meeks in the car at the end.
Yeah.
Is it
Where did he come
That
from?
was great.
Again, a
funny.
very kind of meta kind of thing within films or otherwise, and lots of lots of stereotypes and whatever else. But like uh, Timothy Cavendish, this part of the story was just super fun. I could have read another 100 pages of this quite easily.
Yeah.
And had
Amen.
good fun with it. And I love the commentary from Ernie when he basically says the reason we're all in old people's home is because we are just a bit slow at everything. We become a drag in society by just being slow at things. And I thought that was quite clever in some ways. Like, there's nothing wrong with them. Well thinking, they can do everything, but they're just not as quick as they used to be. And condemned to a prison essentially for that crime.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did was it Sonmi or Cavendish? I think it was Sonmi who recollected a past life, in not a past life, but like they were about to fall off a cliff, or like were really close to a cliff
yeah.
edge, and they recollected falling off a cliff edge. And I think that's the reference to the Louisa Ray story, but I can't remember when. I don't think it was Cavendish, but was it Sonmi when
It
she
is
went
on
to
me,
see?
I think, in the car crash.
Oh, there was a car
I think
crash.
it was the car
Okay.
crash. I vaguely remember what you're talking about. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, was Somni on a cliff edge when she went to the the
Oh,
abbess? Was she walking along a cliff edge there? Was she remembering it there?
maybe.
I
But
think
the
so.
other one was the bridge where the guy tossed the
Yes,
clone
yes, that's
prostitute, and
right.
she distinctly had I remember that. She definitely
That
had a memory then.
yeah.
Um, like
The
she'd
guy
experienced it
chucks his
personally.
clone like it's a
Yeah.
thing, and
Yeah.
calls it defective and wants to buy a new one for his daughter. That was
Yeah.
pretty gross, actually.
That
Yeah.
that was horrifying, and then we find out that that was staged. I mean, it was still true, but it still happened, and it was horrifying, but it was staged.
I mean, talking about connective tissue and Timothy Cavendish, the bit where he revisits the metaphor of the Atlas of Clouds from a different point
Yes.
of view,
Yeah.
where he wants this map to understanding, to following life. This thing that you fundamentally cannot pin down, that is constantly changing. That he wants some way to be able to understand it. This paradox, I just thought was a very interesting way of viewing things, particularly given the context of the previous way we had used the cloud atlas.
And it is like he's sort of wondering about his own existence, because again he thinks about the birthmark, etc., and that it's not the same as other people's. It's sort of as if it was the same, then it would give him sort of reason. It would give him kind of understanding of the world around him a little bit more. It's like this being trapped in this prison nursing home thing is giving him space to breathe and think about himself, and have a stroke.
Absolutely. I think this whole, the way he discusses the Atlas of Clouds, I think plays into what Varsha you mentioned earlier about how this whole book could be viewed as one extended metaphor for the basis of our lives, because that's essentially what he's talking about, is trying to understand and be able to map out your life, and all the changes that happen. And then again, you see that, with how dramatically all of the sections vary. It really is kind of a dramatization, if you will, of the phases of life.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah. I love the irony of when he tries to call home, he gets the phone, he tries to call and he gets who was it? Was it his
His
Sister-in-law.
sister-in-law.
His
sister-in-law
sister-in-law.
who is unable to talk right or convey the information. She has a disability of some sort. And I think the irony of that is that he's perfectly capable, normal guy trapped in this nursing home, for his own supposed problems, and he can't. He finally gets that chance to talk to the outside world, and he's talking to somebody in their own kind of prison, and it's just the irony there was just like, wow, okay, it was funny, but it's also sad when you really think about it. But
Yeah,
it's just like unbelievable, and then then he gets at the end he gets rescued by his faithful secretary, and with the she rearranges stuff for him, and and it's like that's very movie like, that's very Hollywood ending almost. So it's
absolutely.
just funny stuff.
Did anyone else? This isn't that important, I think, but did anyone else wonder if Cavendish's brother was murdered by the grunts who were sent for him?
Yeah.
That was my thought, but then they never came
Yeah.
back up. So
Well,
I was like, maybe
technically was sleeping with the fishes, which is a very mafia hit.
right.
That's right. The carp.
Yeah.
Which goes
Oh,
back to the freaking
yeah.
carp in the
Yeah.
Somni story, which is one of my
Yeah.
favorite parts. Talk about the world building. When that guy appears as like, I love when there's like a mysterious leader who, presents him or herself in a different way, and then using the carp as the symbol. I was like, this is so cool. And the symbolic meaning of carp in, Korea, it's just, I ate that up. Anyway, back to Timothy Cavendish.
Wait, what's the symbolic meaning of carp in Korea? Was it in the book or is it stuff I
It's
don't
so
know?
it's like, I mean, I'm gonna make sure I get this right, but as I understand it, it's like about like a symbol of like life and vitality, and let me see. Okay, I'm seeing success in life.
Yeah,
Is the
that's
specific thing. Yeah, a pair of cards symbolize marriage and marital harmony. They're like symbols of harmony. Is
Hmm.
what I really know it about, and they're used. I know when I visited Japan recently, and they're all over the place. On like
Interesting.
roofs and
yeah.
things as like kind of
I
stability, harmony, goodness.
Yeah, I do remember seeing the carp symbology in quite a few Korean films. That they're pretty big on those there. So,
Yes.
Nice.
cool stuff.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm eager to wrap this up and see where it goes. I'm excited to get back to the Louisa Ray mystery.
Yeah. I'm a sucker for a cliffhanger.
I'm excited for all three of them. To be honest with you, 'cause
Yes.
those are my three favorite to start out with, and
Yeah.
so-
Same. The Adam Ewing one, I don't know. I'm not particularly looking forward to that. I don't want to look up big words, but the other two.
Iconic. I think Louisa Ray I'm actually least interested in, because
Interesting.
I feel like I have some idea of how it will go, and also it's it's I don't know. Yeah, the other two I just feel like are the most up in the air for me, particularly Adam Ewing, which I would have otherwise been least interested in. But the fact that it's ending the whole thing, I'm like, it has to tie everything up. It has to wrap it up in a neat bow. So what is going to happen? You know, the mystery of it, that it's like I don't see how it connects to all the other ones like I do with the rest. Louisa Ray
Hmm.
was probably the most interesting of the first half, the ones I immediately enjoyed the most, but for some reason that's now having this echo effect of where I'm now less excited about getting into it than the other ones, but we'll
It's
see.
also the only story that doesn't connect in two ends yet, if that makes sense. You know, everything else was preceded by a story led into another story. You know, every other section. Whereas this one, we only got the start leading in to the second story, and it'll have the same position kind of going back. It'll only be leading going from the same one story, if you know what I mean, the same origin stories.
Yeah. Well,
So I think that was
what's his name? Frobisher did find the Adam
yes,
Ewing,
the pages of
and
the
he was mad that it ended because it ended the same way we saw it end. So I'm wondering how that's gonna go from his story to the last story. Is he gonna find this lost thing about the rest of it, or is this gonna be something else that ties that together? I'm interested, yeah. And I actually like the Adam Ewing story. I think I'm the only one, but
I didn't mind it. It
No, I
just
don't dislike it. It was just a bit of a struggle to read.
yeah, because of the style of it.
I got more into it as it went along. You know, I remember like the salamander bit when it got really weird. I was really enjoying it,
Yeah.
and I don't know though, but yeah, the language definitely made it harder to invest emotionally, I think.
And
I'm sort of interested in, and it probably won't come from anywhere, but and again, it was very kind of script-led trope where he has Cavendish's mum and dad kind of speak to him. You know, he's going through the gate. You know, maybe he says, "Slow down, no sod it, son, give it a go," kind of thing. Like, who's his mother and father? Given that there's sort of throughput in through, I sort of felt like that could be a potential thread at the time, given that we're talking about reincarnation, and he sort of introduced these two kind of characters in some way.
You know, you raise a point that I hadn't really thought about indirectly, which is for all the exploration of identity and how we change through the years, there's very little about parenting in these stories and parents, which you think are in many ways kind of the definitive relationship for an individual. You know, I mean, they define you as a child, which shapes the way you are for the rest of your life. And that's not explored at all that I can see, except in Frobisher indirectly, right? We get allusions to it. And you know, I think Sonmi, you could argue, like in the way that she is sort of created by the society is sort of her parent. But it's like, it is such a, or wait, was Louisa Reyes, her dad was also a detective. So I guess there's sprinklings of it, but it's just not as big of a thing. I'm thinking about Slush's parent crossing. We also get some with the dad, right? The dad gets killed and the mom's around.
Oh, that's
it's
right.
just not as much a part of the story as I would expect, particularly, you know, in the stories that may or may not align to kind of childhood, as you would assume if it's following the track of a life, Adam Ewing's would, but I don't know.
Very cool.
I was trying to figure out whether relationship with the father is kind of another through line, because everybody mentions their father at some point. I forget what it is with Adam Ewing, but Louisa Ray does. Frobisher has that fraught relationship with his father. Slush's Crossing, I forget the guy's name again, Zachary. He also, his whole story starts with how he lost his father and was vaguely responsible for it. And yeah, Sonmi, I guess, is the missing thread. And then I guess there's this dialogue with Timothy Cavendish. But the other thing that will be interesting to see about the Adam Ewing story is if this continues, if the pattern continues where each story ends with discussing the next story. Like, so right now he's reading the second half of the Louisa Ray mystery. That, let's say, ends with her reading the rest of the Frobisher letters. And if Frobisher somehow managed to get hold of the second half of the journal, then how does Ewing's story end, right?
So, theory time.
Okay, cool.
I think Frobisher's story is going to end with Sixsmith writing letters. I don't think it's going to end with Frobisher. I think Frobisher is going to end up dead. Something about the way that Sixsmith talks about him in the Louisa Ray story makes me think he ends up dead. And a lot about his story gives me the sense that he's leading up to everything falling apart and him ending up in a coffin in the ground. But we'll see. We'll see how that all plays out. I just think, when you have the epistolary format, you inherently have the ability to switch who's writing the letters. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like Dracula
Who's
switches
telling
it
the
a
story.
number of times, and we've already seen within the book the narrator change within a story. So like in Slush's Crossing, where the son ends up finishing out the story of his father, even though the father was the narrator for the bulk of the story. And so I suspect that's my theory. We'll see. We'll see if it plays out.
Yeah, that would be interesting, because we do know that he died young, and Sixsmith has been mourning his death for a long time. So yeah, that would be interesting.
It maybe would add an additional like pang of sorrow, add to the tragedy if Louisa Ray ends the story, assuming she lives through it all, and is reading these letters written to Sixsmith, and then at the end of it all, at the end of the next section, it's Sixsmith himself, who we know dies tragically, capping that off.
Yeah, much to look forward to. I'm excited for the discussion next week.
Very quickly,
I guess
but before we it seems like we're wrapping up. Anyone have any thoughts or comments about Ursula, Timothy Cavendish's ex-flame, ex-lover? I there's so much about it that I've felt like was left vague, and so I'm curious if any. I admit now, as the person who's really reading and invested in kind of following this potential romantic story, and I'm feeling like Ursula is the representation of the other half of the duo,
And it
but
didn't
maybe
work out
not.
in that version of the story, but they were together for a while, yeah.
Right, and I was just wondering, if anyone pick up on anything really interesting, because I just felt like a lot of it was in Timothy Cavendish was just this woman, he's horny for this woman and misses this woman, and she's sort of a symbol of his youth when he felt like he had his life together. And I don't know if there was anything else that I missed in all of that.
Nope, I don't know.
She relocated, didn't she? She moved away from England, as it was, I think, because at the end of the story, when they were talking about who gets the money, obviously the Moogie brothers, or whatever you call them, are going to get part of it, but the rest of it's sort of going to go to him and her, I believe. It's not right. I think she relocated. Janet.
She was in Scotland, wasn't she?
Oh,
Because
was she?
he went to her house and saw her kids and grandkids, and he traumatized one of the grandsons.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I get my characters mixed up. Yes, absolutely, you're right.
These stories were so funny. I would read a whole book from Timothy Cavendish's point of view.
Cavendish was definitely a caper. The end. Oh, by the way, I can't leave you like that.
What was I going to say? Yeah, I was going to ask about the movie, if we wanted to watch it for next week and talk about it, or just skip it altogether, or do a separate episode for the movie.
Interesting question.
I would need a little more time.
Depends how quickly I read the rest of the story.
Yeah.
Let's just do the week after then. Yeah.
I would love to do that. I think it would be really interesting comparing the two, and I want to rewatch the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, this next week is going to be difficult.
Yes, and it's 3 hours long. It's nearly 3 hours long. So it's not a short movie.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So are we moving on to the ink chooses its own squid? Yes. I did that deliberately. The squid chooses its own ink.
Yeah.
It's yes. Sorry. Summary first, Chris.
A guy wonders where Sprinkler went.
Where somebody else's sprinkler went.
Oh, somebody else's. Where this sprinkler went, should I say? I mean, am I missing something? I think that's the story.
Everything needs to be watered, right? Wow. Yeah, this one was kind of
mean, it started off so well.
Did
Wow.
it? Well, yes, I suppose it did. Yeah, because it started talking about plague and all. I
Yeah.
thought it was going to be like a real exploration, and then it was just like
Mhm.
I remember getting to the third page and went, "Have I what have I read? I've been reading and I don't think has anything happened or
It's the opening line, right? It tells you that what happened here happened more than anything in the whole of history. So you're expecting this huge, grand,
yeah,
like, wow, bam, like, and all of a sudden it's just, there's a squid in the garage. Somebody watered it, and then they took the water away, and it died.
yeah.
It's
But it might have
okay.
been an alien.
An alien squid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wait, did it die or did it leave? Oh, it
I
it
forget.
died.
I thought it died, but
Oh man, that's dark. I thought it left. I thought the guy who was watering the squid and the squid had a conversation about
yeah, the catfish
yeah,
is
we don't
dead.
need your help, you can leave, and it left. That's I'm gonna keep that's I don't know why I care, but that's the version of the story that I like. I want the squid to have lived.
The
But
catfish is dead. That's the line, and then we broke up sadly.
yeah.
That was just like, oh, okay.
Oh.
Yeah,
So
it was. I mean, this is sort of at the end of worrying about your neighbors, kind of topic we've talked about before. Communism. My neighbor could be a communist next door. What are they up to? Kind of at that period of history. Um, so maybe it is sort of riffing on that a little bit, but yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't too long.
yeah,
The
I guess go ahead.
well, I like the lines like they said Godfather said, it's the student telling the story to the teacher, and he said Godfather said the visitor was shocked to discover that the government of the world was not in the hands of the best people, but rather those of people who were decidedly mediocre, if not absolute good for nothings. And so like the aliens riffing on our systems of government.
Yeah, yeah, and how we elect. Was there a line in there about how we elect the worst people? Like when we have all these high morals, but then when come election time, we pick
Yeah,
the worst people.
that's why the
Yeah,
visitor was there, because they were worried about all this riffraff having an atomic bomb under their control.
Yeah,
yeah,
So it was
atomic panic.
yeah. Whenever there are elections, then your beautiful humanity stands revealed naked, just as it really is. It's always the worst one who wins. Worst ones who win.
yeah. Yeah. And it's like, and the whole reason the alien died is because this Don Juan doesn't want to change the way he lives.
Yeah,
It's
there
like,
was
oh, come on.
I
The world can
I
go to
thought there
hell.
was
There's a truth in that, though.
Oh, there is
yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, isn't that the same reason why people supposedly, according to this guy, and not that I disagree with him, elect the worst people because you don't want to change the way you live. And um, yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah. You
see.
don't want to be bothered looking into who would be actually the best
Best person.
person to run
Yeah.
the country. You just want to vote for whatever.
mm-hmm.
Interesting
Yeah.
aside, this is Silvio Ocampo's husband.
Yes,
Who
we
wrote
really
The
like
Waves.
Sylvia
Yeah,
Ocampo's story,
wrote The
right?
Waves a few
Oh,
stories
really?
ago.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So little did they probably know that the big book of science fiction would immortalize them within weeks of each other.
Yes, and they were both friends of Borges, and
Yes.
they edited a collection of short stories together called the Book of Fantasy or something like that. But yeah, I thought it started off well, like both with the actual story, but also the language, etc. Because it seemed more dense than the others. Like it had a certain style and cadence to it, but I didn't really enjoy where it went. And maybe it's a metaphor for something that I'm completely missing. But anyway, Cool. Anything else about this story before we move on?
Nah.
Just
Okay.
fascinated by the next title. I just think it's
Yeah.
kind of clever.
2BR0 2B.
Zero is called a knot. Zero is a knot. So it's 2B or not 2B.
Well, well, where's the
Dear.
fun in saying it the right way, Chris? Where is the fun?
Again, I can apologize to every listener for again messing that up for you.
All right, so we'll see everybody next week with that ridiculously named story by Kurt Vonnegut and
Junior.
Junior and the rest of Cloud Atlas. We're going to be wrapping up the discussion about the book, and then the week after that, we'll talk about book versus movie, and that's it. Yeah, we'll be reading Absolution after that, I think, most likely, unless anybody has any objections to it. That's it. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you soon. Bye.